What's up guys? Welcome back to the channel Hand Waving. Your friend Naruto Addict 2.0 is here again with a brand new Naruto fanfic that's going to change everything. A story where Naruto is betrayed and banished. But destiny has bigger plans for him. From exile to emperor, this is the journey of power, strategy, and love. Today's fanfic is titled, What If Naruto Created a Godly Bloodline with Athena? Part 2. That's correct. Motioning for his visitor to wait one moment, the blonde disappeared into the back room. Before long, he returned, this time with a red book in his hands, revealed to be a business diary. It shouldn't be too much of an issue, so long as they give me some time to warn my other customers. This is the first time I've done something like this since I opened. Taking out a pen from beneath the counter, he held it ready in his hand. Did your client have a date in mind? She did. She would like the 14th of February. The 14th. Oh, Naruto started, beginning to flick through the pages before stopping a moment later. He gave the man a deadpan stare, the 14th of February. That's right. So, Valentine's Day. Once again, that is correct. Putting down his pen, Naruto gave the so-called Mr. Black a skeptical look. This guy couldn't be serious, could he? Let me get this straight. Your client wants to privately book out my cafe for an afternoon on Valentine's Day of all days. One of the potentially busiest days of the year for someone like me. Which also happens to be tomorrow. The blonde shinobi felt like wringing the guy's neck when he nodded. That's right. Hence, why I was given this. He held up the hand with the check still resting in his grasp and placed it down on the counter. My client is the understanding kind, and to compensate you for your time and willingness to accept under short notice, I was permitted to offer you a blank check. Naruto blinked in surprise and tilted his head when he stared down at the check. True to Mr. Black's words, the part of the check that displayed the amount of money was blank of any writing, while a very neatly written signature was present in the bottom corner. Your client is serious about this, huh? She is. She is a lady of taste and is not the type who visits the average establishment. For her to come to your business and bring her husband with her is a great honor. The blonde noticed the way the smartly dressed man enforced the last part of his sentence. So, I can write any amount on here. The man nodded, so he further asked, I could write down something like $1 million and that wouldn't be an issue. Watching Mr. Black closely, the man pushed a lock of stray hair out of his face, his gold eyes boring into his own with something akin to amusement. Mr. Uzumaki. Naruto nodded, and let the man continue. All I will say is that money is of no issue to my clients. Name your price, and I shall inform my client you will be expecting them tomorrow without delay. The blonde shinobi couldn't help but whistle, both in amazement and amusement. Whoever they were, they must have pockets that ran deep into the earth if they could throw around words like that. Rubbing his chin as he let the information sink in, he ignored Mr. Black's expressionless stare as the man waited for a response. The blonde shinobi of old wasn't worried when it came to money. Not in the slightest. Over the years of his existence, Naruto had done the smart thing and kept a little nest egg to the side that over time began to grow and grow. It was the side effects of becoming a responsible adult. When his decision to come to New York and set up shop was decided, he dipped into that nest egg and got everything he would need with it. His home, the fox's den, all the appliances, and furniture. Not to mention all his ingredients. If he was honest, when everything was added up, it hadn't broken the tip of the iceberg of the fortune he was sitting on. He rarely touched it and had it all hidden away in a location only he was aware of. Everything he made from the fox's den went into a bank account he set up before arriving. He couldn't look too suspicious. Then again, I am running a business and that's a whole afternoon of revenue not coming my way. $1 million is too much, even if their pockets are too deep to make sense of. He didn't want to appear too greedy, but if they were offering a chance to fill his wallet then why not? He wouldn't go too overboard. $10,000 and you have yourself a deal. Seemed like a fair ask. Hiding his surprise, he watched as Mr. Black didn't bat an eyelash and pulled out a fancy-looking Mont Blanc fountain pen from his inside pocket. Is that made of real gold? How fancy are these people? Scribbling the amount on the check, Mr. Black looked him dead in the eye, the check being offered to the blonde barista. Taking it and giving it a once-over, Naruto smirked at Mr. Black. I hope this doesn't bounce. That would be embarrassing after everything the man just told him. Mr. Black didn't react, he remained completely stone-faced as he replied, trust me, Mr. Uzumaki, it won't. If you say so. Glancing at the name written on the check, he rose an eyebrow, Mrs. P. Underhill. Might I inquire what her first name is? I like to know the names of the people whose money I'm taking. Rolling his neck, a distinct pop made the mysterious Mr. Black sigh in comfort before answering, you'll get your answers tomorrow. Until then, all you need to know is that my clients will arrive tomorrow at 4 p.m. How long they will stay for, I don't know. However, I recommend that you prepare thoroughly. Mrs. Underhill is known to be demanding if the gossip she's heard about your food is anything to go by. He leaned in, with Naruto reacting by doing the same. She has a sweet tooth that puts many to shame, though can be picky. She has high expectations. Is that right? Naruto rubbed his chin, a thoughtful expression sweeping over him. If she had high expectations, then he would need to pull a few rabbits out of his hat. As confident as he was that his menu would knock their socks off, he could prepare some specials dishes for his guests. If they were willing to part with $10,000, then he was going to give them their money's worth. A couple of ideas were floating around. He could have a lot of fun with this. He had a few dishes in the pipeline he could test out tomorrow. Are there any dietary restrictions I should know about? None. Any preferences I should know about? Again, Mr. Black shook his head. Well, that made things easy. All right then. In that case, you have yourself a deal. The blonde extended his hand to the man. Tell Mr. and Mrs. Underhill I'll have some specials whipped up just for them. I'll make sure they get their money's worth. It took a few moments of silence before Mr. Black reciprocated. The man had a firm handshake, and Naruto couldn't help noticing how cold the man's hands were. They felt like ice cubes. I'll pass on the message. Nodding, the blonde pocketed the check. Before the man left, he spoke up again, can I get you anything before you go? Mr. Black was prepared to turn around and leave at a moment's notice, but he couldn't deny the smell radiating from the fox's den was heavenly. He looked across the room, ignoring the shivering forms of the nymphs, and looks at what some of the mortals were eating and drinking. He hadn't visited a cafe in the mortal world in decades. His eyes flickered to the cabinet with the cakes, zeroing in on the chocolate cake to the far left. His tongue licked the edge of his mouth. That looks good. Straightening his tie, his voice was low, almost a whisper, I'll take a slice of the chocolate cake to go, and a regular coffee with no sugar. Coming right up. Valentine's Day. My dear, you can't be serious, Hades muttered, his voice low as his dark eyes took in the orange frame that wrapped around the front of the building. He'd never seen something so hideous and deliberate in centuries. It was like a monstrous beacon of color, and far too bright for his rich taste. Being in an environment where the brightest colors were the glowing crimsons and dark yellows that emanated from the rivers of lava that ran through the underworld, he could say that if he ever found something that sickly shade of orange anywhere near his home, he would send it deep into Tartarus. It would never see the light of day again if he had his way. Who in their right mind would paint the front of their business orange? Standing on his left, his wife of nearly 5,000 years stood in all her outstanding beauty and glory, an array of shopping bags of all shapes and sizes in her grasp. Persephone was as beautiful as the day he first laid eyes on her, more so than that pesky love goddess in his opinion. The shining flower of the underworld, her very presence brought out a side of the eldest son of Kronos that few would get to see. When it was time to separate and her time came to return to Olympus, it was like the joy and happiness she brought with her would evaporate, leaving nothing but his dark thoughts and the ever-present wails of those within the fields of punishment. He felt his wife lean into him, the top of her head barely coming up to his shoulder. Even wearing those ludicrous heeled boots she chose to wear on their outings into the mortal world, he towered over her as he did with most people. He didn't show it, but he was disappointed she wasn't wearing the black dress she frequently wore whilst in the underworld. The one that billowed around her body like smoke, and gave off an aura of mystery. Millennia on from the day they married, and his wife was still capable of making his godly ichor boil with desire. Don't be a bore, Hades. There's nothing wrong with adding a splash of color to an otherwise dull palette. A snort came out of Hades. Persephone, a splash of color is painting a window frame red, or a letterbox a shade of blue. A splash of color is not painting the outside of the building the most hideous shade of orange imaginable. Be that as it may, I like it. You would like it. Are you doubting my tastes? Never, my dear. I'm merely showing how different our color preferences are. Dressed in one of his finest suits for their day in the mortal world, the god of the underworld hadn't been able to hide his skepticism when his wife informed him of their plans for Valentine's Day. If the elder god was honest, he didn't see the point in Valentine's Day. It was a silly little mortal holiday that used that dreadful son of Aphrodite and Ares as the mascot. The love goddess was bad enough on the rare occasion that he came into contact with her, but her son was equally as bad. The only difference between them was Aphrodite knew where the line was when it came to her Olympian family. Eros, on the other hand, had a habit of forgetting the line existed. Being one of the few gods who could strike genuine fear into the hearts of an Olympian like Zeus, Demeter and Hera, thanks to the powers endowed to him by Aphrodite, Hades always kept one eye open should he discover Eros was nearby and in the neighborhood. Those love-enforced arrows of his could do more harm than good. By some divine miracle, the son of Aphrodite knew better than to pick a fight with him, though he couldn't deny a piece of him wished the little pigeon-winged cherub would give it a try. Oh, the satisfaction he would get from beating that little annoyance into Tartarus would be legendary. Back to the point of Valentine's Day, Hades didn't understand why he needed to show his wife how much he loved her on this one particular day. During the 6 months of the year that Persephone was in his embrace, he tried to show her every day how much he loved her. Granted, there were missteps along the way, and their time together had been a learning experience for both of them. His undeserving black heart did love his queen and wife to Tartarus and back. He didn't need a silly holiday to show it in excess. Well, shall we go in? Persephone asked, her watery gold eyes silently motioning to the front door and unaware of his thoughts. Sighing, the god of the underworld knew there was no getting around it. Very well. Persephone puffed out her cheeks in annoyance. You could try and sound enthusiastic. That was me being enthusiastic. His response only served to get a groan out of his wife. Crossing his arms over his chest, his dark pupils flickered to the corner of his eyes, looking in the direction of the Empire State Building. A heavy scowl marred his face, and one of his hands tightened into a fist. Although the mist shrouded Olympus from the sight of the mortals, Hades could feel its presence lingering over the famous skyscraper. The home of the Greek pantheon has never been a home to him, nor did it welcome him like it did the rest of his family. Being near its doorstep, it never failed to stir up old and bitter feelings. His so-called family were the ones who made him into the person he was, keeping him at a distance at all times and never trusting him the same way after the Titanomachy. His temple should have been on Olympus, just as his brothers and sisters were built on its surface. Hell, Poseidon had one on Olympus and within Atlantis. There was no telling how many that dunderhead, Zeus, had. The point was, he helped build Olympus into what it was, and should have been recognized for that like the rest of them. Why couldn't they have gone to another city? Before Hades could let his thoughts begin running away, the petite and smooth hand of his wife laced through his fingers. The contact was enough to halt those thoughts. Stop thinking about them. I wasn't. He didn't fight her grip as she pried his hand away from his crossed arms. Yes, you were. A pang of sympathy ran through Persephone's chest. The goddess of spring had learned the telltale signs of her husband over the millennia. She knew something was bothering him like a pit in her stomach. I know you don't like being so close to Olympus and it stirs up old feelings and grudges, but we've had a nice day out so far, haven't we? It took a moment, but Hades gave a short nod. Good, I'm glad. Let's not spoil it with ill feelings. His expression softened. It's not that I haven't enjoyed our time today. I have enjoyed it, I promise. He gave her hand a light squeeze, and felt the corners of his mouth twitch up when she smiled at the gesture. I don't see why we couldn't have gone somewhere else. California, Boston, even Miami would have been a welcome change. The essence of my siblings and Zeus's ilk can be sensed all across New York. I'm surprised we haven't run into one of them yet. A sigh escaping her lips, Persephone dropped her bags and laced her arms around her husband's neck. The gesture was enough to feel Hades lean his body into her, embracing in the warmth she provided. Despite the size difference in their appearance, the queen of the underworld proved she was stronger than she looked. Today is all about us. Don't make it about them. Hades stayed silent for a couple of moments, letting her words sink in. I know, and I'll try. That's all I ask. Standing on her tiptoes, Persephone laid a gentle kiss on her husband's pale cheek. Put them out of your mind and enjoy this place with me. I've heard great things about it. Even Thanatos told me how much he enjoyed the food here. The crumbs from his chocolate cake were still on the corner of his lips when he came to confirm the reservation. I guess if Thanatos enjoyed it, then it's worth a try, Hades admitted. Like most of the gods and goddess of his ever-expanding godly family, his lieutenant was a picky eater, and like himself, had a rich taste when it came to mortal cuisine. If Thanatos enjoyed what he ate, then it couldn't have been awful. Though, he was still skeptical about the kind of man that painted part of a building orange. Lead the way, my love. Persephone beamed at Hades, the twitching of his lips strengthening until a small smile graced his often scowling face. Pushing the door open, the sound of the bell rang as they entered. Like their fellow immortals, a wave of warmth shrouded over them, and Hades watched as his wife visibly relaxed and together they took in the room. The rich smell of coffee laced the air, reminding him of the mornings his wife would wake him up with his favorite blend of coffee. The room was bigger than either of them expected, with tables and chairs pushed to each side, with one singular table with two chairs sat in the middle of the room. You must be the Underhills. Both sets of eyes gazed over to the counter, where the patiently waiting owner was stood. The Underhills, Hades thought, rolling his eyes at the surname Persephone had given them. His wife loved coming up with new aliases for them during matters like this. Walking out from behind the counter, Naruto extended his hand to Hades, a pleasant smile on his face as he greeted the pair of immortals. My name's Naruto Uzumaki, the owner of the Fox's Den. First things first, I would like to thank you for taking an interest in my humble establishment. When your representative came by yesterday, I hardly believed it. I thought he was joking at first, but I can see he was telling the truth. It's nice to meet you both. Shaking his hand, Hades noted the firm grip the blonde gave him and felt his wife step forward and offer her hand. Instead of shaking her hand though, Naruto gently took her hand into his own and placed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The act was enough for Persephone to widen her smile. She liked a mortal with manners. He's very easy on the eyes too, Persephone thought. A handsome face, and a very nice body if the way his clothes tighten on his body is any indication. She was no Aphrodite, but she could window shop from time to time. You're most welcome, and I'm happy you accepted my offer. I'm sorry for the short notice, but the news doesn't tend to travel to our neck of the woods until much later, though I've heard nothing but good things about this place. If he had told Thanatos no, then Persephone planned on having him wrapped up in the mist and make it happen either way. I'm Penelope Underhill, and this is my husband, Hank Underhill. Persephone promptly ignored the look her husband was giving her. Well, come over and take a seat. Reaching behind the counter, he pulled out 2 menus and offered them to the pair of gods. Make yourself comfortable, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to look at the menu. He motioned to their table. Also, just so you're aware, I've got some specials of the day prepared for you both. Think of it as my way of ensuring you get your money's worth today. I'll read them out when I take your orders. Thank you, that sounds delightful, Persephone replied, the excitement brimming as she wondered what Naruto had prepared for them. Gently, she pulled her husband to their table, with the god of the underworld glancing at Naruto from the corner of his eyes. Making themselves comfortable and discarding her coat, Persephone eyed her husband. So, what do you think so far? The god of the underworld took notice of the excitement in his wife's voice. She looked at him expectantly, without trying anything on the menu. I can't make any judgment yet. When his wife scowled at him, he internally sighed and made a change to his answer. It appears adequate. The place has a nice atmosphere. The rich smell of coffee is pleasing, I'll admit. As suspected, her face made a 180. I knew you'd like it. The goddess of spring sounded very pleased with herself. There's so much to choose from in here. I'm not sure where to start. The beginning would suffice. A kick to his shin beneath the table forced him to grunt. Don't be sarcastic, my love. It's unbecoming of you. Persephone remained focused on the menu, a content smile plastered on her face. Hades could see her eyes at work, taking in all her options. I wonder what specials he made for us. It's all very intriguing. I find myself curious also, Hades replied. An annoyed expression wormed its way onto his face. Was Hank the best you could think of? It's a nice name. It's a traditional name in the mortal world. The goddess glanced up. Is there something wrong with my choice? Nothing, but I don't see why we can't use our real names. Because no self-respecting mortal woman would name their child after the god of the underworld. Name one mortal carrying your name, and we can go home right now. When he didn't speak, Persephone's smile gained a satisfaction to it. I rest my case. Now, less brooding and more choosing. Understood. Remaining silent, Hades opened the menu up and let his dark eyes scan over the contents. He would let Persephone have her fun. His wife did appear excited during their shopping spree earlier in the afternoon. There appears to be something for everything in here, he mumbled, his hand coming up to sweep his oily black hair back. He must go through ingredients like they're going out of fashion if he offers everything he says he does. He must be doing well to afford it. As the richest member of his Olympian family, call him curious if he wondered how a mortal could afford such a massive selection. Most places he was aware of didn't provide a third of what the blonde owner was offering to his clientele. Did he make everything that was listed on the menu? If not, then he must have dozens of suppliers in the pipeline. His cash flow must be a constant wave. He couldn't help with the way he thought. As the god of riches, it sparked his curiosity. Focus, Hades. Pick something before your wife calls you out on it. While Hades was busy mulling over his thoughts, Persephone was busy biting the corners of her mouth. She couldn't decide what she wanted. Everything sounded so good. Where to start? If it wasn't for word getting to her by Hermes, who was delivering a package to Hecate in her residence within the underworld, then she wouldn't have heard a peep about the fox's den. News tended to reach the underworld slower than most, though when she asked why she hadn't heard about such a place existing sooner, she noticed Hermes begin to shuffle around uncomfortably. Surely, any place that attracted the attention of multiple Olympians was worth hearing about. Despite not being an Olympian, being one of the eldest children of Zeus, as well as the queen of the underworld had its perks. Suffice to say, it took 5 minutes before she had Hermes spilling out all the gossip on Olympus. Her time in the underworld had provided her with many a means to get the information out of her unwilling hostage. By the time she let her little brother free, Persephone was internally seething. Cracks formed on the marble floor of her husband's palace as she marched back to her chambers. That damn Aphrodite. Oh, she knew the love goddess could be petty, but she was asking for it now. Aphrodite had done everything in her power to keep the information from getting to the queen of the underworld, and Persephone knew why. Their little rivalry that started with Adonis all those years ago continued to plague them to this day and only worsened as time went on. The two goddesses used to be good friends, but these days after the Adonis incident, their relationship never recovered. The two were always trying to one-up each other in a variety of ways, to the point that the other gods would simply bypass them. The stunts they pulled on each other were legendary. However, when one of her mother's servants informed her by iris message that the love goddess planned to visit and spend the evening at the fox's den with the owner's scrumptious treats, the goddess of spring couldn't help but throw a wrench in her plans. Valentine's Day was a big day for Aphrodite, and Persephone couldn't help but grin at the satisfaction of denying the love goddess of what she desired. Even if it was for only one day. She couldn't sense the love goddess's essence anywhere near the fox's den, which meant she hadn't stopped by yet. The look on her face would be priceless. When 5 minutes passed, the two gods felt their host appear next to them, his notebook and pen in hand as he gave them a polite smile. So, before I take your orders, would you like me to read out the specials for you? The blonde looked pleased with himself. Yes, please, Persephone replied, followed by a nod from Hades. She couldn't wait. Well, Naruto started, for this special day, I have arranged 3 different dishes for you, all of which were freshly baked earlier today. The first of which is a grapefruit curd tart with chamomile whipped cream. Persephone's eyes lit up, followed by an audible intake of air. The second is a fig almond tea cake with a coconut honey glaze. Finally, since it's Valentine's Day, I thought the third option should be something related to the subject of love, so I prepared a chocolate-dipped strawberry Neapolitan cake. Hades hummed as he leaned back in his chair. The god of the underworld wouldn't admit it out loud, but the choices laid out to them sounded very appetizing. If the mortal prepared such dishes for them, and if he liked them, he would be willing to leave a generous tip for the man, despite the money already provided. Despite his reputation, Hades commended hard work and dedication. Looking at his wife, Persephone was practically bouncing in her chair, her eyes lit up like fireworks. If the dishes were half as good as the gossip suggested, then Persephone contemplated dragging the man to the underworld and having him set up shop just for her. She had a spot in mind next to her famous garden. That way, she and her husband could have their orders brought to them on the veranda overlooking the fields of Asphodel. Her fellow goddesses might not be happy with the change in location, and it meant they would have to gain her husband's permission to enter his realm if they wanted to visit. Seeing his wife's excitement, he snapped his menu shut and looked his wife square in the eye. In that case, we'll take all 3. My wife and I will share a plate of each of your specials between us. Naruto nodded and wrote it down on his notepad. His smile widened when he saw Persephone reach over the table and take her husband's free hand into her own. A tiny smile grew on the face of Hades and winked in his wife's direction. It was beautiful to see how in love the pair were with each other. He got the feeling the husband was the type who would go to the moon and back if it made his wife happy. You guys are a sweet couple. That's kind of you to say, Persephone replied, her thumb tracing against her husband's pale skin. He can be as stubborn as a mule when he wants to be, and moodier than a bull seeing red, but deep down my hubby is a softie. Not enough people are lucky enough to see that side of him, but I do. She gave her husband a reassuring squeeze. It hasn't been easy, but we've been married for a long time and overcome obstacles that would cause most to call it quits. I hope he knows how much I have come to love him. The god of the underworld's expression softened further. He does. You're lucky to have each other, Naruto replied, his gaze turning and staring out the window at the people walking the pavement across the road. Most people these days don't seem to understand how precious marriage is, especially when the right person comes along. It provides an opportunity to grow in selflessness as you serve your wife, or husband, and any children that come from the union. It's more than a physical union, it is also a spiritual and emotional union. Both immortals looked at him with mild surprise. They both looked into his blue eyes and noticed a sadness within them. Any kids? Both nodded. A daughter, Hades quietly replied, still looking up at the blonde owner with an inquisitive stare. That's nice. Are you married? The question came from Persephone. Right before her eyes, she noticed a momentary shift happen with the blonde owner. Like a door had been cracked open, followed by a wave of sadness briefly resonating from his person, and his face gaining a faraway look as a sad smile took over. Persephone almost wished she hadn't asked. Widowed. Oh. Her voice was quiet. I'm sorry. She hadn't intended to stir up old feelings. To be so young and already a widow must have been difficult. He looked barely out of his 20s. It took a few silent moments before the blonde shook off the sadness, his smile returning to normal and waving a hand in the air. Don't be. It was a long time ago. Seeing you both together reminds me of my time with my wife, and how I wish we had longer together. I miss her, dearly. He brought his notepad and pen back up. Now, let's keep going with your orders, shall we? What would you both like to drink? Oh, that's right. They still had their drinks to order. Releasing her husband's hands, Persephone had a skim through the menu one last time before she confidently knew what she wanted. I would love one of your coconut and vanilla cappuccinos, please. It sounds delicious. Nodding his head, Naruto turned to Hades. Could you serve anything a little stronger? Hades asked. The hot drinks offered on the menu sounded good, but the elder god had a desire for something with an extra something in them. Stronger. In what way? Say with a little extra kick. Hades put some emphasis on the last part, and Persephone watched as an understanding occurred between the two men. Tapping his chin with his pen, Naruto made a humming sound. I get you. Normally, I wouldn't serve any alcohol in my drinks, which is why I haven't put any on the menu. Although, I could make an exception given the private setting. Did you have something in mind? Perhaps an Irish coffee? Would that be out of the question? A half grin stretched onto Naruto's face. I think you might be in luck. Naruto gave an appraising look. I like your style, Hank Underhill. Hades nodded in the blonde's direction, saying nothing about the alias. It will take a bit longer to prepare, so I hope you don't mind the wait. That's fine. The rulers of the underworld watched the blonde disappear and get their orders ready, leaving the pair to rejoin their hands across the table. He seems nice. He's all right, Hades replied, for a mortal anyway. Persephone leaned her free elbow on the table, and placed her head in her palm. We should bring Melino with us next time. That girl doesn't leave the underworld enough. Although, she rubbed tiny circles in the back of her husband's hand, it might have to wait until the fall. I'll be returning to Olympus in a few weeks. Maybe we can plan an outing for the three of us when I return in the fall. A grunt came out of Hades' mouth. He wasn't against the idea. He just didn't like hearing his wife speak about their upcoming separation for 6 months. Don't be like that. It will give us something to look forward to when I return in the autumn season. I'd like it better if you stayed with me all year round. Hades spat bitterly. If it wasn't for that overbearing idiot I'm forced to call my sister throwing a tantrum, then you would be with me always. To this day, after millennia had passed, the relationship with Demeter only worsened over time. The goddess of the harvest and the seasons couldn't accept that Persephone could love someone like him. If Demeter had her way, which at one point she did, then she would lock her daughter away in a secret location only known to her, and barred anyone else from their family from ever seeing her. Demeter took the term mother knows best to an extreme level, and he knew how frustrated Persephone could get with the woman who tried to control every aspect of her life. You're doing it again, my love. A knowing look crossed over her face before the goddess stood up from her seat. Never breaking the hold on her husband's hand, Persephone guided her chair around the table and sat next to him. You can't help yourself with forcing negative feelings to filter into your mind, can you? What am I going to do with you? You could stay with me, and tell Demeter to off back to the nearest wheat field. He replied, though regretted it when Persephone picked up a spoon and bobbed him on the forehead with it. Ow. You might not like her, but she is still my mother, no matter how overbearing she can be. It comes from a place of love. Leaning back in her chair, she crossed one leg over the other. If you're a good husband for the rest of today, and you don't allow any more negative thoughts to filter their way in, I might consider treating you later. Treating me. Reaching next to the table, Persephone pulled up one of her many shopping bags and gave it a shake in the air. While you were busy ogling one of the store's clerk's chest, she gave him a brief look, making Hades have the decency to gulp. He thought he'd been more discreet. I went and got a little something from the lingerie department. I thought I could wear it tonight. The lingerie department. Humming in confirmation, a coy smirk wove its way onto her face. Would you like me to wear them for you tonight? It comes with this little piece that leaves little to the imagination. Hands still together, Persephone could almost feel her husband's godly ichor begin to heat up at the thought. Would you like that, my love? Very much so. He'd be a fool not to follow her orders. Good. Then no more negative thoughts and you might get to see it later. Very well, my queen. Small talk broke out between the pair, time passing quicker than either realized. Before long, Naruto returned to their table, smiling at the fact Persephone was sat beside her husband, and started by lowering their drinks onto the table. Both looked impressed with their drinks, noticing no spillage on the side of the cups nor on the tiny plates they were settled on. The goddess of spring could smell the coconut radiating from her drink, and let out a hum of delight the second her drink touched her lips. It was delicious. The coconut and the vanilla could be tasted evenly, and neither overpowered the other. It was perfectly balanced. Oh, that's amazing. She sunk into her husband's side without noticing Hades was still staring down at his drink. It looked good, and the smell of his Irish coffee was heavenly on his sense of smell. Though, he would admit the heart that the blonde owner had decorated on the foam of his drink put him off. Don't think about it. Just enjoy it, and you'll be rewarded when you get home. He was getting his treat. Bringing his drink up to his mouth, Hades found himself pleasantly surprised. It was good. No, it was better than good. It was incredible. It was so good, that Hades checked whether any nectar had been added into the mix. It smelled like freshly baked cookies and tasted like dried fruits, orange peels and baking spices. It was light in body but packed a powerful punch. What whiskey did you use? Single malt Irish whiskey, Naruto replied. I keep a bottle in the office. Sometimes after I close up for the evening, I'll take a glass with me while I clean up. I'm not much of a drinker, but I like a whiskey from time to time. Hades nodded, and offered his wife a sip of his drink, and appeared pleased when her mouth made a tiny O shape after taking a swig. It's good, huh? It's very good. The pair didn't wait long, and moments later, both were rendered awestruck as the plates of food were presented to them. Though for Hades, awestruck was his eyebrows lifting, and his jaw hanging open a minuscule amount. Still, to get the reaction from the god of the underworld was a praiseworthy feat. The moody god rarely showed emotion in front of mortals. Persephone though was much more vocal, and let it be known. Oh, my goodness. She clapped her hands together, her taste buds salivating the longer she stared at the dishes. All three of their orders appeared baked to perfection and were beautifully decorated. This is beyond what I imagined. Thank you for saying so, Naruto replied. I hope you enjoy your orders. If there will be anything else, let me know. I'll be stationed by the counter. The blonde gave a short bow out of courtesy and left the mesmerized couple alone to enjoy their meals. Pulling out a book from the counter, he crossed a leg over his knee and sat comfortably as the two immortals enjoyed their orders. Thank you very much, Persephone whispered, her eyes never leaving the three plates. She didn't know where to start. All three looked so appealing she was having a crisis just deciding where to begin. They look so good, but I don't know if I want to spoil the way they look. They're beautiful to look at. Hades looked at his wife and recognized the excitement rushing through her. Her face was mesmerized, and he couldn't blame her. Their food looked like something Hestia, or his mother, would create. This mortal was full of surprises. Licking the edge of his lips, Hades picked up the nearest fork and took a piece from the grapefruit tart. He planned on going from left to right. He heard Persephone gasp as if his action was unwarranted before she mimicking his actions. On the count of 3, both brought their pieces up to their mouths, chewed for a couple of seconds, and promptly fell back into their chairs. Both their eyes glazed over in delight, their shoulders slumping in comfort, and their breathing synchronizing. Neither could have prepared for the onslaught of flavor that assaulted their taste buds. Holy gods above! This is the best thing I've ever tasted in my life. Persephone muttered, nothing even comes close. I'm sorry my love, but I think Hestia and your mother no longer hold the top spot anymore. She wasn't kidding. Gods and immortals were notoriously hard to please, in almost every way one could imagine. For a mortal to be talented enough to render herself in such a state with food was unfathomable. My love, are you okay? The goddess of spring waited a few moments before she got a response, only it wasn't the response she imagined. Instead of words coming out of her husband's mouth, it was a long and drawn-out moan of pure delight erupting from her husband's mouth. It was guttural, like the sound was coming from his very soul. Oh my. By the counter, Naruto didn't even look up from his book. He merely shook his head and continued to read. Persephone said nothing, nor did Hades react to the sight of his wife staring at him with surprise. Instead, he shocked Persephone by cutting a larger piece of the tart with his fork and chomping on the dessert as if it was about to disappear from his life forever. Though he remained silent after the second bite, the smile on his face grew wider and wider by the second. It was as if the tart was pumping pure happiness into the veins of the god of the underworld. Hey, no fair. Stick to your half. Persephone pushed her shock aside and wrestled her husband's fork away from the tart. She wanted another piece too. Don't make me poke you with the end of my fork, my love. It went on that way for the rest of their time spent at the fox's den. Never had the smile on Hades' face reached as wide as it did that afternoon as he ate cake and joked with his wife. Food was truly the way to a person's heart, and Persephone for one loved every second of it. Their afternoon that Valentine's Day became one of their happiest memories in recent memory, and served to cherish the love and bond husband and wife felt for each other. The blonde couldn't fathom the priceless service he'd provided for his two customers. Once the pair of immortals finished devouring the tart, they moved on to the tea cake. Once that was finished, they moved on to the Neapolitan cake. If the moans of delight that came from both Persephone and Hades were any indication, then the day had been a success in Naruto's eyes and ears. For the next couple of hours, the pair continued to order the same special dishes over and over again, and the blonde hadn't minded at all. Watching them out of the corner of his eye, the old shinobi felt old memories begin to stir in the back of his mind as a familiar beauty appeared in his mind. Hinata. Boy, he hadn't thought about his wife in a very long time. Not because he didn't want to see her beautiful face in his mind, but because when he did picture her, it only served to remind him of everything and everyone he'd lost. The ones that were forever out of his reach. Gone to a place he could never go. Sometimes when he was drifting off to sleep, he imagined her arms wrapping around his body, her head resting on his chest and her legs resting against his knees. Sleeping with Hinata beside him never failed to help lull him to sleep. Whether it was her steady breathing or the sound of her heart beating against his ear. She never failed to see the good in him. Even after becoming Hokage, and the stress and pressure of preserving the peace they all fought so hard to achieve began to pile higher and higher on his shoulders, she never failed to turn that weight as light as feather the moment he stepped inside their family home. Seeing her smiling face, her eyes full of love and arms awaiting his embrace, it was a feeling that he cherished to this day. Other times, he pictured Bolt and Himawari scooching into bed with them. Their son would tuck himself between his parents, his head resting on Hinata's ample chest, while Himawari would lounge against her father. Sometimes her legs would be strewn across his face, or her body horizontal over his stomach. His daughter could sleep in the strangest of positions. These days, he awoke to a cold and empty bed, serving to remind him of his place in the world. They had been gone a long time. Sometimes, for the briefest of moments, he could feel them standing next to him. However, as soon as he became aware of the feeling, it vanished as quickly as it came. He took it as their way of saying hello. Truth be told, he felt a little depressed when they entered his mind. Shaking his thoughts and feelings away while he was on the job, he noticed Mr. Underhill trying to catch his attention, and quickly moved over to fulfill his request. This was his life now, and deep down, he knew he couldn't dwell on the past. No good came from being stuck in the past. It was just hard letting it all go. What can I get for you? While Hades spoke to the blonde and ordered another set of the specials, the goddess of spring remained silent, an eerie feeling in the back of her mind. The hairs on the back of her neck were standing on end and goosebumps ran up and down her arms. She hid her surprise while her husband and the mortal conversed, and turned her head so she was facing the window. Why did she have this feeling someone was watching her? When her golden eyes noticed a figure standing in front of the window, the reason for the feeling became apparent. Ah, That's why. Standing behind the glass and going unnoticed by the mortals dotting the street was none other than the goddess of love, stood with her arms firmly set by her sides, her eyes a torrent of angry colors as she tried to glare a hole through the back of Persephone. She sported a new look, like she often would when the two goddesses met in the spring and summertime, with blonde hair in a bob-style haircut. Looking the woman up and down, she saw Aphrodite was wearing a very expensive-looking purple dress. It left an ample amount of cleavage and would have left men and women a salivating mess. It wasn't hard for Persephone to understand what the goddess had planned, and realize the goddess' plan was to entice the delightful blonde owner into joining her in the bedroom. Ha! Not today. A smirk wove its way onto Persephone's face and took a sip of her wonderful drink, mouthing silently how amazing it was to the glaring goddess. The act was enough to make the goddess of love tremble, the glaring intensifying. Aphrodite would likely try and get her back for this in some creative form, but right now, she didn't have the heart to care. Instead, Persephone decided to do the childish thing, and give Aphrodite one last parting gift before returning to her husband's company. She brought up her hand and offered Aphrodite the bird, all the while her smirk widened. "My dear, what are you doing?" Her husband's voice brought her attention back to the table and found Hades and Naruto staring at her. The latter had his notepad and pen in his hand. "Nothing, darling. Nothing at all," she replied, adopting an innocent smile as she clasped her hands together. "Another round of everything then." The moment the bell rang, Naruto's face lit up as a familiar customer appeared before him. "Well, if it isn't my favorite customer." The goddess of the moon blinked in surprise at the blonde's voice. After a long and tiring couple of days training the newest members of her hunt and running them through their first ever monster hunt with little sleep, Artemis decided she needed to slip away for an hour. As always, she left her faithful lieutenant, Zoe, to keep the girls in line until she returned and have the chores completed. The three new girls, Lucy, Tracy, and Eloise showed promise, though it would be many years before they came close to acquiring the skill set her older hunters possessed. Hunters like Zoe, who had been part of the hunt for over 2,000 years, and Phoebe, a daughter of Apollo who'd joined before even Zoe, were two of a handful of young women who grew into elite warriors after spending centuries at her side. Like her aunt Hestia, Artemis often spent the time in a younger form. Most often it was in the form of a girl between the ages of 13 and 15, as many of her young companions tended to fluctuate between those ages. It was a method for her to bond with her hunters, particularly the younger ones who might find her adult form too intimidating and imposing. To make them feel more comfortable, she took on a form that helped them feel at ease. Most of her hunters had come to her to escape from the grasp of evil men and their dark thoughts and desires, which was why her group of maidens were women and women only. Though only a handful of men had ever earned a place in her hunt, it was exceptionally unlikely in this day and age. With some time to herself and Zoe running the hunt in her place, Artemis teleported to New York. Changing back into her adult form, and adopting modern clothing rather than her hunting gear, she headed straight for her favorite spot in the city. She sent a message to Athena and asked if her sister wished to join her, but the goddess of wisdom was currently engaged in a meeting with Hephaestus. For once, she was going it alone. "Good afternoon, Naruto." "Good afternoon." He handed her a menu and led her to a table near the counter. "It's been a little while since you last visited. I was beginning to wonder if I was ever going to see you again." One of his hands dug into his pockets. "Your sister not with you today?" "I've been busy of sorts these last few weeks. Out of state," she explained. "This is my first time back in the city in over a month." Her most recent hunts had taken her across the North American continent, hunting creatures and monsters big and small with the aid of her hunters. One of the aspects of hunting monsters she always found exhilarating was never knowing how long each hunt was going to take. Some hunts could take no longer than a couple of hours. Once, a hunt back in the 1400s took no longer than 5 minutes when they discovered the monster they were requested to track and destroy was no more than 300 yards up the dirt path from them. However, other times she participated in hunts that took years to complete. Though time-consuming, The feeling of ending a hunt after such a long period was one of the most gratifying feelings a huntress like herself could have, and no, my sister was unavailable. Though, I'm sure she will stop by for a visit soon. I see. Not to worry. I'll have to keep an eye out for her. He laughed. She always has the funniest reactions when she visits. Is it terrible of me to say it brightens my day when I catch her reactions from the corner of my eye? Artemis couldn't help but half grin at the statement. Truthfully, Athena's reactions during their visits tickled her funny bone as well. The first time with Kurd still replayed over and over again in her mind, and while shocked the first time, now the Olympian found the scene hilarious. Athena had sworn her to secrecy over that incident, but it didn't mean she couldn't use it to tease the elder goddess. It's not, though I wouldn't mention it to her. She advised, half serious and half in humor, my sister isn't the type who handles being embarrassed very well. I would be careful, and not make your amusement too obvious. Understood. I'll try and be discreet. He could do that. He was a ninja after all. Discreet was his middle name. See that you do. Looking around the room, she noticed she was the only customer and forced a frown to etch over her beautiful features. Where was everyone else? She thought business was booming. The last time she was here, she and Athena had been lucky to get a table. If they arrived even a minute later, they would have been forced to leave disappointed. Where's all your customers? I thought the business was doing well. The idea that her favorite place wasn't getting the attention it deserved was ludicrous. A chuckle escaped Naruto. They were all here earlier. Her blank look coerced him to elaborate. It's Sunday and I close at 2 on Sundays. Remember. The goddess of the moon had let that piece of information slip her mind. I was moments away from closing up for the day before you came in. Artemis's eyes widened a fraction. How could I forget? She looked at the clock behind the counter and read 14:05. In her excitement, the Olympian forgot there was a 3-hour time difference between California and New York. How foolish of me. She fought the urge to facepalm. Her excitement had gotten the better of her and the lack of sleep from the past couple of days was catching up with her. I'll go. My apologies for, she started to say, already on her feet when the blonde owner waved his hands in the air. Another chuckle escaped him. Don't worry about it. Sit down. Sit down. Are you sure? Artemis hated being needlessly in the way, as rare of an occurrence as it was. Very. Now sit and make yourself comfortable. He replied, his voice laced with confidence. If any other male had spoken to her like that, then she would have turned his into a jackalope. However, since it was the blonde who she was developing more than a tolerance for, she would allow it. Though, he better not push his luck. She sat back down, her menu returning to her hands. Very well, but only because you insisted. Inwardly, she let out a sigh of relief. She'd been looking forward to this all day. Her sweet tooth was craving for a slice of anything she could get her hands on. The stuff she ate with the hunt was decent, but it never left her fully satisfied, especially her need for sugary baked goods. Her hunters were novices at best when it came to cooking, despite trying in the past to have Hestia give them a few pointers. Smiling, he walked over to the door and switched the open sign to close. He didn't want any more walk-ins. So, what can I get you? He asked. He didn't bother with his notepad and pen. He already had an idea what the auburn-haired woman was going to order. Vice versa, Artemis looked at him with a blank look, while raising one of her eyebrows. Surely he wasn't serious. I'll take my usual, please. Salted caramel hot chocolate. Of course. And the cake. Carrot, please. 2 slices. Artemis even held up 2 fingers. His smile grew wider at the cheek. All right, I'll be with you shortly. He turned and prepared to move away. However, the goddess watched him halt mid-step. A thought crossed his mind that Naruto had been meaning to ask should he encounter her again. Can I ask you something? Artemis raised another eyebrow, as long as it's nothing personal. She liked the mortal, but she hoped he knew his boundaries. There was still time to turn him into a 4-legged critter. For his sake, he better not ask her on a date as previous foolish men tried. It didn't end well for them. To her surprise, Naruto caught onto her thoughts and shook his head. It's nothing like that. Cross my heart. He motioned a cross shape over his chest. It's something I've been wondering and meaning to ask you since your first visit. When Artemis motioned for him to continue, he asked his question, what's your name? Artemis blinked in surprise. That wasn't the question she was expecting. My name. The blonde nodded. Yeah, your name. I've wanted to ask since you almost cleaned me out of carrot cake on your first visit. You and your sister have become regular faces around here, but I still don't know your name. I'd like to rectify that if you let me. His smile returned, and he gave a light shrug. You don't have to, but I wouldn't mind knowing the name of my favorite customer. The goddess hummed in thought. She sensed no ill will in his voice, and his posture was calm and relaxed. If he was up to something, he hid it well. Though some men were known to have the uncanny ability to hide their true selves behind a mask or facade of a false persona. However, the moon goddess liked to think she was a good judge of character, and thus far the blonde owner had yet to give her a reason to think he was up to no good. He didn't strike her as the type who would possess evil thoughts of that nature. So far, he had proven himself to be a decent man, whose primary concern was keeping his business running and showing kindness and good food to his customers. Leaning back in her chair, she gave a small nod. I don't see any harm in it. My name is Artemis. Naruto's smile widened, and let out a hum. Artemis. He repeated the name a couple of times. He liked the way it rolled off the tongue. That's a beautiful name. You're named after a goddess, you know. Artemis fought the urge to smirk. Instead, she wore a playful little smile that few male mortals got to see. I know. Since my family is Greek, they felt it was appropriate for me to have a Greek name. What could be better than being named after a goddess? Not much, I guess. He chuckled. Indeed. Do you know much about Greek mythology? It's not a subject people study much these days. It's a rare following. The blonde owner nodded. His hands rested on the chair in front of him. It just so happens I do. I learned a lot during my time in Greece, as I mentioned the day we met. It wasn't just the language and the food I studied, but the whole mythos that surrounded ancient Greece. I visited a lot of the old sites like you would do in a country with such a rich history. He thought back to the days he traveled around, and thought back to one of his many visits to the old country. I visited the Acropolis in Athens, the ancient Delphi, Meteora, Epidaurus, ancient Olympia. Those are just a couple of places I had the pleasure of visiting. I can only imagine what they were like back in their day. Yes, I can imagine. The goddess replied, playing along. He ran a hand through his hair. You know, I went to what's left of the old temple of Artemis in Turkey a long time ago. He revealed, making Artemis look at him in interest. I'm not sure what I expected to find, but I couldn't help feeling disappointed when I saw all that was left was foundation and fragments. Looking up at the ceiling, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, remembering his time in Ephesus. I bet it was a thing of beauty back in the day. Oh, it was, and Artemis knew full well how majestic her old temple was. Back in ancient times, her temple was frequently visited by women and men of all ages, praying to her for several things that fell under her jurisdiction. The men would pray to her for successful and plentiful hunts, while expecting mothers would pray for strength for the coming days that lay ahead of them. Her temple was one of the most iconic temples ever built on the earth, rivaled only by the Temple of Athena at the summit of the Acropolis and the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. However, twice her temple had to be rebuilt. The first time, a devastating flood reduced it to rubble, courtesy of Poseidon after one of his infamous temper tantrums. The god of the sea had been forced to pay a great tribute to her as compensation. The second time, a few centuries later, her temple was burned to the ground by that foolish mortal, Herostratus, who sought notoriety and fame. She couldn't lie and say she didn't take a small amount of pleasure in watching the foolish man from getting his just desserts during his execution. Although a modern model was built years later in Istanbul, she had only visited the site once. It didn't possess the same value as the old versions, and a rare handful of people prayed to her these days. While lost in her thoughts, the blonde disappeared behind the counter and got her order underway. You don't mind if I get things cleaned up after I finish your order, do you? She shook her head, not at all. Fortunately for her, she didn't have to wait long before Artemis found herself sinking into the chair as the taste of her hot chocolate covered her lips. Releasing a small hum of delight, she moved onto her cake, and like always, felt her sweet tooth getting utterly satisfied as her immortal taste buds were showered with sugary bliss. How the mortal man did it, she didn't know, but she wished that she did. Artemis was a decent cook, given some lessons by her mother in Hestia, but had never made anything remotely as sweet and perfect as the meal in front of her. Was there a method to the man's madness? Was there someone helping him? She'd never seen another soul working the little cafe in the time she spent in its warm embrace. She remembered that he mentioned making from scratch many of the delightful goods himself, but when did he find the time to make them all? His menu was vast and unpredictable. It would take him all through the night to make it all. Not to mention, there was the issue of keeping it all fresh. It was a mystery, and part of the moon goddess wanted to solve it. Don't rock the boat, she thought to herself. She had a good thing going here. The fox's den was an escape. Somewhere she could get away for an hour or two. She and Athena had been the first to visit, and since then, more and more gods and immortals from their world were beginning to take notice. On the one hand, she wished the little cafe had been her secret with Athena which only they could enjoy. On the other hand, at least it was getting the business and fame it deserved. If it closed down, Artemis was sure she would weep for days. No more hot chocolate. No more cake. What a dark world that would be. From her seat, Artemis couldn't help but watch him as she sipped her drink. Without Athena to talk with, she had little else to do but watch the man at work. He has good balance, she mused, watching as he stacked one of his trays high with cups and plates, and balanced it on the tips of his fingers. For 10 minutes, Artemis sat and watched him moving around the room as if his body was on autopilot. As soon as one task was done, he was on to the next before she could blink. His rate of work is impressive, she mused, before inwardly frowning and rolling her eyes. Stop praising the man. Gods, what is wrong with me? A hand waved in front of her face, and Artemis found the blonde trying to catch her attention. A broom was in his hand, with a small pile of trash piled together next to him. Yes. Had he asked her something? She was so lost in her thoughts that she hadn't noticed. Did you need something? Nothing important, but I did want to ask you another question. Though, only if you don't mind your attention temporarily leaving your cake. Another question. How bold of him. I'll allow it. However, I expect another round of both. She pointed to her empty plate and cup as she chewed on the final piece of her meal. All in good time, he laughed and took her words in good humor. I asked, what do you do? What do I do? She repeated, a frown appearing at the words. What do you mean? I mean that you said you were out of the state, right? She nodded. Well, was that because of work? If it was, then I was asking, what do you do for a job? What's your profession? Oh, that's what he was asking. Her mouth began to move, yet before any words could come out her mind stepped in. What was she going to say? It wasn't like she going to spill the beans to him and tell him all the glorious details. There's a goddess in front of you, who just so happens to be the actual Artemis we were talking about earlier. Crazy, right? Yeah, no, it was rare for her to inform mortals, especially male mortals, of her true identity. As much as the blonde had grown on her, he still didn't need to know the nitty-gritty details. The only mortals she told were the girls who joined her hunt, demigods she happened to come across, and the few mortals that were clear-sighted and could see through the mist that wrapped around their world. The blonde was neither a woman nor was he a demigod, and Artemis was close to positive that he couldn't see through the mist. Therefore, her identity would remain a secret from him. Although maybe telling him he's serving a goddess would earn me a discount, she mused, though shook those thoughts away. She would tuck that question away for another time. She paused for a moment, before settling on a story, guidance counselor. Really? Roll with it, she thought, before continuing, that's right. I specialize in helping young women, typically teenagers and sometimes younger that come from broken homes or have faced abuse in their past. That part wasn't made up. I have a group of girls that I take away on retreats, working with them out in the wilderness and teaching them how to survive in nature. We go camping, hiking, and I've even shown them how to hunt and gather their food. She heard him whistle, and stare at her with an impressed look. Wow, that's amazing. He grabbed a couple of napkins from the counter and handed them to the waiting hands of the goddess. How many do you work with? About 3 dozen. On your own. All on my own. My sister chips in from time to time, but most of the time it's just me. Her sister often pointed her in the direction of young women that required her aid. Some of Athena's past daughters were once members of the hunt, though none currently existed within the group. Does that surprise you? She watched and gauged his reaction, and felt a stroke of relief when he shook his head. It doesn't. To be honest, I am not surprised at all. She stared at him curiously. Oh. And why is that? His expression turned thoughtful. I'm not sure why and I can't explain it well, but when I saw you the first time you visited, I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that you were someone who liked taking care of people. Oh, that surprised her to hear. She leaned forward, inwardly urging him to continue. She wanted to hear more. There's something about you that makes me believe you're someone who has seen bad things happen to people. Maybe you've had bad experiences in the past, or maybe you haven't. That's not my place to ask. He gave her a look, indicating he wasn't going to push that subject with her. Either way, you have this energy about you. It's comforting and warm, and I felt it the first day you walked through that door. He nodded over to the door, and smiled. I think you're someone who wants to shield people, in this case, young girls, and gives them something to strive for. You don't want them to lose themselves down a dark path because of the abuse they've suffered, so you take them into a safe environment and you teach them how to survive. You teach them how to be strong. He leaned on the broom, and his smile widened. I've met a lot of people, and I've met some who have done awful things to others. Going across the world opens up a box that can't ever be closed. Sadly, I've come to realize some people can only be described as awful, misguided and cruel. They inflict pain onto other people for reasons that make no sense. Women, in particular, tend to get the short end of the stick every time and end up suffering at the hands of both men and their fellow women. Whether it be physical abuse, mental abuse or any kind of abuse for that matter, no one should have to go through those kinds of horrors. There was a brightness to his blue eyes when he looked at her, knowing that young women have someone like you in their corner, someone who fights for them and shows them kindness and a helping hand. It proves my assumption about you was correct. He went back to his cleaning, though not before saying, by the way, your meal's on the house today. Think of it as my way of saying thank you. Returning to his work, the face Artemis sent his way went unnoticed. The goddess of the moon could do little but stare silently at the blonde, her crumb-covered mouth partially open as she gawked at him. This mortal, this man, continued to baffle her. She was 4,593 years old, and she could say with all certainty, she had never been praised by a male mortal in such a way before. One that wasn't a demigod, or had any connection to their Olympian family. Even Zeus, who doted on her and Athena like they were still small goddesses he could pick up and lift onto his shoulders, had never praised her for her work in such form. It was always something regarding her skill as a warrior, and never as a nurturer. People forgot, and she included her family in that category, that she was more than just the goddess of the hunt and the moon. She was also the patron of young women and children and held divine authority over childbirth alongside her sister, Athena, thanks in part for delivering her twin Apollo from their mother. She could be nurturing and loving. She didn't have children of her own out of choice early in her life, but she showed compassion and kindness to children of both genders regardless of the sins of the parents. Her hunters could attest to that. This man, he was confusing her. The first time they met and he surprised her behind the counter, she thought he was like all the rest. She thought he would be arrogant or overconfident with his talents as a chef. The rest of the world would be if they possessed a tenth of his culinary talent. However, Artemis was pleased that she had listened to Athena and given him a chance to prove himself to be unlike the others. He was confident, but not overly so. He took compliments with grace and no shortage of embarrassment, and his sunny disposition and kindness had wormed its way into the good graces of many of her family members. He was a good one. Artemis had come to that realization. "You don't have to do that," she replied. She watched him blink. "I know I don't have to." He looked up from the floor, and smiled in her direction, "But I want to." She was prepared to argue her point but stopped when he sent her a light scolding expression, "Take the offer. I'm only offering it today. Use this chance wisely." There was a hint of a challenge in his tone. The goddess huffed and crossed her arms. Beneath the table, her foot tapped against the floor in mild annoyance. Fine then. If he was serious about her not paying, then she was going to take advantage of his kind offer. She hoped he was ready because her sweet tooth was already returning in force. His kindness would be his downfall because she planned on upping her appetite to the next level. Outside, across the street from the fox's den, as the blonde shinobi and the goddess of the hunt conversed with each other, little did they know another Olympian was also in the neighborhood. This Olympian had been made a fool of by the blonde, and thanks to him became the butt of the joke by his family and came looking for revenge. He didn't know who it was, but someone had leaked to his Olympian family what had occurred that fateful day and he hadn't heard the end of it. Everyone, including his father, would snicker every time he walked into the room, and his brothers had become intolerable. Apollo and Ares were on his case every free moment he had and it was making his ichor boil. Even Poseidon caught wind of it beneath the sea, and Iris messaged him for the sole purpose of pointing and laughing at him. He couldn't stand it. He was sure it wasn't Hestia. His lovable aunt would never betray him in such a form. Maybe it was the nymphs, but he doubted any were brave enough. Satyrs. No, not the satyrs. They would never betray him. No, he bet it was that damn Terminus. That stupid border god loved to make his life miserable. Oh, when he was finished with the blonde, Terminus was next. That was for damn sure. "I got you now, you conniving SOB, Hermes whispered, his blue eyes narrowing at his foe. Wrapped in the mist, he remained hidden and out of sight from his foe. Next to him, the dark-haired god patted his secret weapon that would even out the scales and delivers to him his sweet retribution. Like he promised to his aunt, he wasn't going to kill the mortal. However, that didn't mean he couldn't hurt the mortal. It wouldn't be too severe, but it would be funny. What was his weapon of choice? He could have gone with a couple of choices, however, his genius mind had settled on a Hephaestus-grade mashed potato cannon. It had taken some bribing since his elder brother didn't do anything for free, and a great amount of patience, but he finally convinced the god of the forge to go through with his request. Modeled after one of the old 24-pounder long guns used by the world's navies between the 17th and 19th centuries, the only difference between his one and the old models was that his shot out mashed potato at a frightening speed and was capable of shooting through a tree. He tested it once the other day, and it was safe to say, Ares had not been too happy at being his test dummy. The god of war had been exiting his temple when he was hit by a condensed shot of mashed potato and was sent sprawling through his home yelling and cursing. He hadn't realized Aphrodite had been visiting, and the lump he called his brother had landed on top of her, covering her in mashed potato and ruining her dress. The goddess of love had given him an earful later on, but it was worth it. All he had to do now was catch Naruto at the right moment and lay him out with his glorious cannon. There was only one issue with his plan, and it was one he hadn't been counting on. Hermes had hoped the blonde would be alone to avoid additional casualties. He didn't think Artemis of all people would be there at this exact moment. However, as unwise as it was with the goddess of the moon present, Hermes would carry on undeterred. His schedule over the next month was hectic, and that was putting it mildly. It was now or never, even if it meant upsetting his dangerous and temperamental older sister. "Come on, Hermes, you beautiful man. You got this," he repeated to himself, psyching himself up. Naruto whistled. "Boy, you sure showed me." Staring at the plates and cups that were piled high around her table, the blonde couldn't do anything but admire the auburn-haired woman's determination and seemingly bottomless pit she called a stomach. It reminded him of himself. You know, I wonder if that's some kind of new record. Maybe I should have your face framed and put on display on the back wall for all to see. Wiping her face with the napkins provided, the happy expression plastered on her face bordered on smugness. She wasn't sure how long it had been since she'd self-indulged to such a degree, but it was hard to care about such thoughts when she felt so pleasantly full. Her appetite was something of infamy on Olympus, and despite being notably smaller than her divine brothers, and some of her sisters, Artemis could outlast all of them when it came to food. Most of the time she could restrain herself, but being told everything was on the house for one day only, restraint had gone out of the window. How gluttony wasn't one of her domains still mystified her. I'd ask where it all goes, but I know questions like that could get me in trouble with women. Artemis snorted, smart man. It's nice to see a man with a brain for once. Naruto bowed in response. I suppose I should leave you be, and let you go home. I've been here an hour longer than I intended. She needed to get back to her hunters. Zoe, in particular, would be wondering where she had gotten to. Thank you for your time and patience, and thank you for staying open longer for me. The gesture is appreciated. Hopefully, I'll be able to come back sooner. She stood from the table and dusted off the crumbs from her shirt. I look forward to it, Naruto replied, looking at the high pile of plates and cups. He was never more thankful for his dishwasher than he was right now. Despite being kept longer at the fox's den than he'd hoped, he found himself enjoying the small talk that began between himself and Artemis. They went back and forth on whatever crossed their minds, and he found himself enjoying her company. It was nice talking to someone who wasn't one of his clones. Artemis had the same thoughts, though wouldn't admit it out loud. The mortal man was all right in her books. An idea popped into his head, and he motioned for Artemis to wait for a moment. Watching him disappear, Artemis stood by the counter, watching the door that led to the kitchen and listening to the movements and mutterings of the blonde. What in the world is he doing? She wondered. When a minute passed, she was about to head towards the door when Naruto came waltzing out, pushing the door open with his left leg and carrying two large white paper boxes in his arms. What's this? Just something from me to you, he replied. You said you see your group regularly. Next time you see them, treat them to what's in the boxes. He smiled and lifted one of the lids, revealing the inside of the box. The inside was littered with goodies that would have made Artemis salivate with greed. Dozens of cookies were piled high on each other, with gooey chocolate on the inside. The smell made Artemis close her eyes, taking in the scent. Maybe she could make some room in her stomach after all. The other one has squares. There should be enough for everyone to have a couple each. This is very kind of you. You don't have to do this. She watched him turn to look at her, blue meeting silver. She knew his eyes were blue, but she never noticed how blue they were. They were more vibrant than Apollo's, and even her father's. Like I said earlier, I know I don't have to, but I want to. His smile widened, and shrugged. Maybe, if you and your group are ever in the neighborhood, you could come and visit. I'll treat them all to hot chocolates and cakes. Closing the lid shut, Artemis placed one box on top of the other and lifted them into her arms. That wasn't a bad idea. She had a feeling her hunters would come to like this place as well if given the chance to visit. Sure, that would be nice. His face brightened. Then, until next time. Until next time, she replied, and starting moving, could you get the door for me? My hands are a little full at the moment. Sure. He wandered over and pulled the door open, bowing low in an overdramatic fashion. The action was enough to make her snort, though in amusement rather than annoyance. Thank you. Taking one last look at the blonde, her face frowned when she looked down at his shoes, pointing out, your shoelaces are untied. Huh. Blinking, he looked down and saw she was right. So they are. Thanks. Crouching down to tie his laces, Naruto was none the wiser when out of nowhere, A loud bang erupted in the air and he felt something whiz past the top of his head at tremendous speeds, grazing the tips of his hair. He almost jumped up in surprise and felt something splash against his cheek as a thud followed after. He spun around, noticing none of the people out in the street appeared bothered by the loud noise, and searched the pavement for anything that could have resulted in such a loud noise. What the hell was that? He thought. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the alleyway opposite the fox's den. He could sense something across the street, but whatever it was masking its presence and trying to keep itself hidden. It felt familiar, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Touching his cheek, he wiped off the residue from whatever splashed against him. He stared at it for a couple of seconds before realization hit him, as this mashed potato. Why in the world was mashed potato flying through the air? Hey, do you know, he started to say, but his words died in his mouth when he got a look at Artemis. Oh boy. To say Artemis had been unlucky would be an understatement. The goddess of the moon and the hunt, who moments ago was happier and more content than she had been in months, was now on the other side of the room with her back resting against the wall of the fox's den, cracks covering the wall like a spider's web. The impact of the mashed potato from across the street had caught her unguarded, and tossed her through the air and into a sitting position, her legs out in front of her and arms wrapped around the cake boxes in a vice-like grip. Her body was covered with mashed potato from head to toe, with large clumps of it wrangled in her hair and up her nose. Naruto couldn't say a word and watched as the realization of what happened slowly dawned on Artemis. Her face, once wearing an amused smile, quickly morphed into one of pure fury that Naruto wouldn't wish on his worst enemy. He let out a gulp and got to his feet. Reaching behind the counter, he pulled out a towel and wordlessly handed it to Artemis, who took the towel and wiped the vegetable residue off her face. Her silver eyes zeroed in on the alleyway, like a lion who found its prey and got to her feet. She turned her attention to the gobsmacked Naruto and handed back the towel, which he gingerly accepted. Thank you. If you would excuse me. It appears I need to make a trip home, and... She trailed off mid-sentence, her rage consuming her body. The blonde could do little more than nod his head as the auburn-haired goddess left the fox's den, cold fury taking over her entire person. He idly noticed her make a motion to her neck, dragging a finger across the jugular before disappearing from view. Turning around and now on his own, Naruto sighed when he noticed it wasn't just Artemis that was covered in mashed potato, but now potato was strewn across the inside of the den on every side. I just want to go home, he muttered, before beginning his cleanup again. Run, Hermes. Run as you've never run before. Hermes muttered to himself, running across Olympus and leaving a trail behind him as fear encased his entire being. That damn blonde. Why did he have to at that exact moment? Running across his ancestral home, the god of messengers thought about his options. The mortal realm was out of the question. Artemis would find him in a heartbeat. His temple was out of the question, and the unsaid rule about gods not barging into others' temples would go widely unnoticed in this situation. He doubted his sister cared for that rule with all that rage coursing through her. He ran through his options. Apollo isn't here, nor is Ares. Dionysus is at Camp Halfblood, and Hephaestus has locked himself in his forge again. His brothers wouldn't be of any use. Apollo, in particular, had a weak spot for his twin, and would likely give him up rather than help him. Aunt Hestia, Demeter and Hera are visiting grandmother, so who knows where they might be. Their grandmother came and went from Olympus when she pleased and became increasingly difficult to track. Her residence, a pottery studio she started a decade ago, had a habit of shifting and alternating its location. There was Athena to turn to, but Hermes shook that out of his thoughts. Athena and Artemis were close, and his elder sister would likely conspire with Artemis to have him tortured if given the chance. She still hadn't forgiven him for painting one side of her temple pink while she was visiting the mortal world. Gulping, his choices were running low. Poseidon and Hades would turn him away, the latter in particular. Though he could beneath the sea and the underworld, he wasn't supposed to abuse that privilege given to him by his uncles. Angering the gods of the sea and the underworld was not on his to-do list. One man-hating goddess was enough. Biting the bullet, Hermes changed course and made a beeline for the grand temple made of white marble that stood closest to the throne room of the gods. Hopefully, his old man wouldn't be bothered too much by the sudden intrusion. Hermes. His face going pale, Hermes bolted towards his father's temple, his sister's voice ringing throughout Olympus. Her godly energy fluctuated in bursts and was likely sensed by all currently residing on Olympus. It was potent enough that Hermes could practically feel her rage. "Oh, man, she is so pissed," he muttered, narrowly avoiding colliding with a pair of nymphs, and shouting an apology as he ran past them. In mere seconds, Hermes found himself pushing open the enormous golden doors of his father's temple and ran inside, slamming it shut behind him. The inside of Zeus's temple was exactly how one would imagine it to be. It was large and spacious, and everything was made of marble. Personally, Hermes preferred hardwood flooring and found marble floor much too slippery for his liking, but he wasn't about to doubt his father's taste in decoration. A grand staircase left up to the second floor, where the master suite resided, along with a long hallway that contained many of his father's trophies and statues depicting his greatest triumphs. If that wasn't enough, a large statue of Zeus stood in the center of the temple, reaching the height of the roof and seen by all on every floor. Catching his breath, the sound of a TV reached his ears and Hermes noticed the faint glow coming from one of the back rooms. It looked like it was coming from his father's theater room. His father was a massive movie buff and had a thing for romantic comedies, not that many knew of course. Probably looking for the next Hollywood starlet to seduce, Hermes thought, before making a beeline for the room. His father loved celebrities almost as much as Aphrodite. As he expected when he appeared in the doorway, he spotted his father sitting in a comfortable black leather recliner with gold stitching. Zeus's theater room was giant, even by normal standards, and designed in the same manner as a mortal theater, with Zeus's favorite movie posters decorating the walls. Godfather, in particular, was his father's favorite movie of all time, and Hermes had caught the king of Olympus reciting quotes from the movie as if they were Shakespeare. Shelves were filled to the brim with DVDs, VHS tapes and old movie reels. Off to the side was a confectionery stand that was always stacked full of Zeus's favorite movie-going treats. He even had a slushy machine with over a dozen different flavors constantly churning away. Wearing his usual suit with lightning dancing across the fabric, the imposing aura his father tried to induce was given away by the pair of fuzzy white slippers his feet were clad in. They'd been a gift from Hestia a few years ago, and the god of the sky was rarely seen without them when roaming his temple. Hera had tried to get him to wear something different when they spending time together smoozing in one of their temples, though she had yet to succeed. Storming into the room, he looked around and quickly searched for the best hiding spot. In this case, he chose to hide behind the enormous golden curtains that covered his father's screen when it wasn't being used. It was big enough for a human body to hide without notice. The god of the sky and king of the gods blinked in surprise, a handful of buttery popcorn in his hands and flecked across his beard. Gathering his bearings, his face turned into a scowl, and a thrum of his immense power washed over the room, followed by the smell of the ozone. "Hermes. What do you think you're doing?" He paused the movie, with the image of Bobby Busha about to football tackle a teacher frozen on the screen. Zeus loved Adam Sandler, but that was neither here nor there. "Sorry, Dad." The younger god slipped behind the curtain, and Zeus felt his son's godly energy vanish. "I'll make it up to you, I swear. Just don't let Artemis find me." A grunt escaped Zeus's body. "What did you do, you idiot?" Behind the curtain, Hermes was about to explain the situation to his father, hoping he could understand his plight. Though Zeus was a squishy marshmallow when it came to his immortal daughters, Artemis and Athena in particular, he could only hope his father would back him up on this one. Zeus practically invented the bro code after all. However, before Hermes could utter a word, the sounds of Zeus's temple doors creaked open, forcing Hermes to become as silent and still as a statue. Turning to the doorway, Zeus watched as his youngest Olympian daughter walked through the door, and was quick to notice the substance covering her body. Potato. He thought before his mind went to work and put the pieces of the puzzle together. He snorted and rolled his eyes, all the while shaking his head. His sons seemed to forget how formidable their Olympian sisters could be. Walking into the room with her hands clenched into fists, the goddess of the moon flittered across the room as silent as a deer, her eyes working 1,000 miles an hour as she searched every nook and cranny within Zeus's theater room. Father, she greeted, leaning over and placing a delicate kiss on her father's cheek. Her eyes never left the movie screen, and Zeus watched as her eyes searched the curtain on the left side, before settling on the one on the right. Her eyes narrowed, and Zeus watched in mild amusement as his son's hiding spot was compromised. Artemis stepped forward with an expression that promised a great deal of pain when Zeus called out to her, "Moonflower." She turned and stared at the king of the gods. If it was anyone else calling her that name, Artemis would have wrapped her bow around their head. It was a pet name she earned when she first visited Olympus. Only her father, and her mother, Leto, were allowed to call her that. Even Apollo would find his head buried in the earth if the name found its way escaping from his lips. Yes, Papa. Zeus had half a mind to chuckle when he heard the name. She only called him that when she wanted something, or when she needed to get away with something. Take it outside. Angry as she might be, he had no desire to watch his temple get turned inside out by his 2 children. Fine. Her words came out as a grumble, but the attitude disappeared the moment her eyes returned to the curtains. Before Zeus could blink, he watched as Artemis bolted forward, and dived behind the curtain. Silence reigned for no longer than a second before the wails of his son rang through his temple, forcing the king to shake his head as Artemis dragged Hermes out from behind the curtain, his head locked in her arms in an uncomfortable-looking headlock. His son tried to fight out of it, his arms swinging wildly in the air, but Artemis avoided every swing. The god of messages tried to look up at his sister. It was an accident. I swear, I was meant to get the barista. His words had the opposite effect he was hoping for. Artemis didn't say anything, and instead tightened the hold she had around his head. If he wasn't a god, then Hermes's head would have popped off like a champagne cork. Dad, get me out of this. Hermes chalked out before his sister's free fist came crashing down on the top of his head. A look of sadistic delight washed over her face, pulling the flailing Hermes out of Zeus's theater room and out of the temple. You brought this on yourself, Hermes, Zeus grumbled, before unfreezing the movie. He knew his daughter's temper was almost as bad as his, though hopefully, she could restrain herself from taking it too far. Chin up. Not that face. Please, not th. A squelch followed by a cry of agony, making Zeus wince as the door to his temple slammed shut. Shaking his head, he ignored the commotion happening outside, and leaned back in his recliner, digging back into his buttery popcorn. A bark of laughter soon escaped his mouth. Ha! This movie kills me every time. The blue eyes belonging to Naruto Uzumaki snapped open with the shinobi bursting up from his bed. His breathing was deep and ragged, with a sheen of sweat covering his forehead. Around the crew neck of his white t-shirt, drips of sweat darkened the fabric and stuck to the skin beneath. His body shook as his left hand came up and gently patted his chest, trying to regain control over his breathing. He crouched to one knee next to the bed, his free hand running his palm across the smooth fabric of the bedsheets as he felt the adrenaline begin to leave his body. After a couple of minutes, he changed his position and sat with his back resting against the bed. His head leaned back, staring up at the ceiling while he switched his bedside lamp on. Next to the lamp sat his alarm clock, displaying the time, 4:01 a.m. He still had an hour before he needed to get up, but something told him he wouldn't be falling back to sleep. What the hell was that? His dream, or nightmare, whichever he wanted to refer to it as, had been so vivid. Sometimes when people dreamed, their bodies switched to a kind of autopilot and went through the motions of the story that was playing out. Other times, they would watch themselves in the third person, watching the choices they were making. It was like a cinematic dream, and the person was watching a movie play out in their mind. This one, however, was a lucid dream, and Naruto was in control of his every action. He didn't dream often, but when he did, his mind got creative. Hinata. Of course, the dream was about Hinata. His late wife had been on his mind for weeks now, ever since the Underhills visited the Fox's Den for their Valentine's Day. At first, it was random thoughts popping into his mind here and there. He'd been eating a bowl of ramen in his living room when his thoughts turned to the evening Hinata outclassed himself and Choji to become the undisputed ramen-eating champion of Isaraku Ramen. To this day, he didn't know how she did it, or where all that ramen went. Other times he thought about their afternoons together in their garden after he made himself some tea. Hinata was a master when it came to brewing tea and tea ceremonies. She taught him everything she knew about brewing tea leaves and getting the taste just right. Most mornings, when he woke up, his hand instinctively reached out to what would have been Hinata's side of the bed, wanting to feel her warm body beneath his fingertips. Now, it was just the cool surface of the sheets. In the dream, it felt so real. Hinata had been right in front of him, barely a meter away and in touching distance from his hands. She looked as she did when Bolt started attending the Ninja Academy, with her lavender jumper and her hair falling just above her shoulders. She was as beautiful as he remembered and called out to her, but his voice was unnaturally silent. He took a step forward, and Hinata was pushed back a step. This went on for what felt like an eternity as the distance between them remained the same. They were so close, and yet she was a fingertip away. He started running, his arms stretched out as far as they would go, but still, he couldn't reach her. Then the ground started to shake. No. Her face became a picture of terror, her eyes as wide as the moon as the ground beneath her feet became less solid and stable. Dirt began to rise as Hinata started to sink into the earth, reaching her shins in a matter of seconds. Naruto's actions became more frenzied, and his voice, despite being silent, became raw as he wore out his throat muscles from his voiceless shouts. In a matter of moments, he was forced to watch as the dirt reached her neck, her body disappearing beneath the ground as her pale eyes looked at him for help. Don't take her from me. His thoughts went unanswered, watching as the face of his wife disappeared entirely, the earth swallowing her body to make it look as if Hinata had never existed at all. Falling to the ground, the sobbing blonde couldn't do anything as he brought down his fist repeatedly against the ground, try as he might into forcing it to give his wife back. Each hit fell more silent after the other, until he was little more than a sobbing mess, his face covered in a mixture of dirt, snot and tears. Give her back. The ground shook again, and he felt the earth beneath his body begin to ripple and move around. Jumping up from the ground, he paced backwards a couple of steps and watched with pained eyes as the dirt began taking the shape of a feminine face. The eyes, the nose and mouth all took shape, with the face being as large as king-size mattress. The mouth parted, spitting up dirt and rocks into the air while her eyes burst open with eyes a mixture of moss and coal. Just looking at the face made him fearful and angry at the same time as his hands clenched into tightly bound fists. You, he remembered roaring, his voice returning to him at last, haven't you done enough? All he got back was a peal of laughter reminiscent of two stones grating against each other. The eyes looked at him through the laughter, the moss growing a brighter shade of green. The laughter went on until finally, his rage got the better of him as a Rasengan formed in his hand. It grew to the size of a basketball initially, before continuing to grow until it was the size of a small car. Throwing his arm forward, the A-ranked jutsu collided with the face, destroying its shape and kicking up an explosion, though the laughter continued until it became more a heckle. The next thing he knew, he was awake and jumping to his feet. Surveying the room after his not-so-pleasant dream, he winced when he noticed the spider web cracks that now decorated his bedroom. He hadn't realized until now that his chakra must have been leaking while he was dreaming, causing the room to shift as it took a turn for the worst. He was going to need to fix that at some point. Well, I doubt I'm going back to sleep now, he muttered, mentally telling himself to add it to the list of things he needed to do around the house. The house he bought was a bit of fixer-upper and hadn't been well maintained by the previous owner. Slowly, he'd been going around the old red brick Greek townhouse and turning into a home to be proud of. He didn't like all the new builds you saw walking the streets of New York. He'd grown to appreciate the buildings with a bit of history. The ones with a story to it. This one, in particular, dated back to 1846. Throwing his sleep clothes to the bed and making his way to the bathroom, he soon found himself sighing in relief as the hot water of his shower doused his body. He felt his stiff joints begin waking up from their dormant state. I hope today's a quiet day, he thought, before humming and reaching for the shampoo. For many across the world, New York City was a playground for the wealthy and the beautiful. Any given sidewalk was full of men and women who were more beautiful than the last and wasn't afraid to show off that great beauty. As one of the world's leading hubs in fashion and beauty cosmetics, mortals from all over the world would flock to grab a piece of the fame that came with being beautiful. Often enough, people would stop and stare at a beautiful woman or a handsome man as they walked past, their desire reaching the surface, while their minds reminded them it would never be. Sometimes when a celebrity of notable fame was passing through, people would flock to them like a pack of rabid dogs. In this case, the entire sidewalk, as well as the sidewalk across the road, had stopped dead in their tracks. Waves of desire hit the mortals like they were being thrown into a head-on collision with a truck as their eyes followed the most beautiful woman and the most handsome man they had ever seen. With a skip in her step, Aphrodite soaked up the attention sent her way like a sponge soaking up water. Dressed in form-hugging jeans and cream-colored top, her heels clicked along the pavement as she sent a cheeky wink in the direction of a group of men who were too busy falling over themselves to care how stupid they looked. I think today's going to be a wonderful day. Aphrodite giggled, watching as a man across the street walked into a streetlight, while an older gentleman was being glared at by his wife as his hands roamed over his chest. The glare didn't last long as the woman soon became transfixed by the man that walked a step behind Aphrodite. His hands were tucked into his jeans, his long blonde hair tied back in a man bun and a pair of sunglasses resting on his head. His upper half was covered in nothing but a form-fitting sleeveless white t-shirt, showing off his muscled and bronze physique and arms that left the mortals a puddle of goo. To a mortal, it looked as if the man had stepped out of Baywatch. His shining eyes held the same joy for life that the love goddess possessed, scanning over both the men and women he passed by. His smile figuratively and literally brightened up the sky, as clouds parted to make way for the beautiful golden rays of the sun. When Aphrodite came barging into his golden temple on Olympus, the god of the sun didn't need convincing to spend the afternoon with her. Apollo determined from the first day he met the love goddess, life would never get boring on Olympus with Aphrodite around. When the twins of Zeus and Leto arrived together on Olympus, Aphrodite initially had gone to Artemis, trying to woo her with her silver tongue and mold the younger Olympian into another version of herself. Unfortunately for her, she arrived on Olympus not long before they did, but the whispers and rumors about Aphrodite's promiscuous nature had already woven its way into Artemis's ears. The goddess of the moon was quick to keep her at a distance. Instead, she chose to side with Athena, and the goddess of wisdom had been delighted to take her little sister under her wing and show her the ropes around their godly home. Though disappointed, Aphrodite instead turned her attention to the younger of the twins and was quick to snatch the young god into her claws. Showing off her immense beauty to the young Olympian, along with Apollo inheriting his father's lust for anything with two legs, it didn't take long for the god of the sun to become Olympus's biggest playboy. She and Apollo were like two peas in a pod, as the mortals would say, and she could say he was the god she got along with the most, minus Ares and Hestia. Granted, their relationship did strain for a while due to the whole business between Apollo and Eros, but that was all in the past. These days, when she needed a good night out, or to endlessly gossip about the handsome men and beautiful women she'd brought to her bed, Apollo was her go-to guy. "Dite, how much further is this place?" "Not long, my dear Apollo. Not long," she said, and noticed his pouty face staring back at her. "What's the matter? You're not still mad, are you?" "Yes, I'm still mad." He waved his hands in the air like a hot-tempered child, breaking the aura of smooth and handsome he loved to expel so much. Why didn't you bring me with you when you, Athena and Artie went to this place? I had to hear about it from Hermes. And he heard about it from Ares, who heard about it from Dad. I wanted to go too. Honey, it was impromptu and it was a girl's day. You are not a girl, and you weren't around. What was I supposed to do? You could have Iris messaged, he mumbled, kicking an empty can to the side of the sidewalk. Looping her arms through his, Aphrodite giggled and patted his cheek. Around them, the male mortals were wishing they were Apollo, while the women wished they were the ones holding onto his bicep. I'm very sorry for not including you. Next time, I'll make sure to send you an Iris message. She squeezed his bicep. Forgive me. She leaned up and kissed him on the cheek, causing the mortals to nearly combust. His shining blue eyes took one look at her quivering lip before his attitude did a 180. I can't stay mad at you, Dite. At least, not for long anyway. His attention turned back to the sidewalk, his negative feelings disappearing like they were never there to start with. That was their relationship to a T. One moment one could be mad at the other, and the next, they were best friends again. Man, I'm excited. Is this place as good as they say it is? I know nymphs and satyrs tend to exaggerate, but I haven't heard a negative thing from anyone. Aphrodite tried not to grin. Apollo, trust me when I say it will blow your expectations out of the water. It's that good. It's that good. I Frenched the owner in front of everyone when he gave me the most delicious entremet of my life. Even after all the time that passed, Aphrodite could still taste the apple spice on her lips, driving her taste buds wild with desire. Her smile turned coy. I heard Artemis has even been visiting him on her own in her downtime. Apollo gasped at his Olympian bestie. No. Way. Honey. Very way. But Lil Sis doesn't like anyone. She doesn't even like me on most days. Apollo could think back to all the times he tried to get his sister to come around and lessen her hate towards men, and each time it blew up in his face like a bolt of lightning to the crotch. To think, some no-name guy mortal with a talent for making good food and coffees could earn his sister's respect and, dare he say, affection. This guy must have been the real deal. His eyes narrowed, and a pout wove onto his face. This guy better not be trying to put the moves on my lil sis. Oblivious to Apollo's thoughts, Aphrodite's smile could melt the iciest of hearts. I know, which makes him all the more incredible. They rounded the corner of the street and the familiar orange frame of the fox's den came into view. Smiling with glee, Aphrodite pulled Apollo harder, nearly causing the sun god to trip over his own feet. There it is. It was hard for him to miss. Wow, that's a bright-looking building. It's almost as bright as my temple. Avoiding the mortals that were gaping at them, it didn't take long before the goddess of love was pushing the door open, and the familiar rich smell of coffee and pastries assaulted her senses. She sighed in pure delight, as the warmth tickled her skin. It was just how she remembered from her last visit. The room was half filled, mostly by pairs and couples, though a table consisting of a nymph and a satyr stuck out to the pair off in the back. Nothing had changed, and Aphrodite was glad. Prying Aphrodite's hands off his arm, Apollo was quick to fall into a similar state as his immortal relative. Taking one long whiff of the delightful aroma, Apollo visibly relaxed. It smells amazing. For a first impression, Apollo was impressed. The fox's den looked like a place he could frequent. Eyes scanning the room, his gaze was quick to settle on the beautiful nymph dining with the satyr. Whoa! Look at that hottie. Long dark hair and magenta eyes, he couldn't help but lick his lips at the curves she was sporting. I call dibs.